The notification sound from my phone pierced through the quiet evening air at exactly 9:47 p.m. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Harold had bought me 30 years ago, working on a crossword puzzle when the message arrived. It was from my neighbor Chen, but what she had recorded and sent me would change everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son's wife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The voice was crystal clear through my phone's speaker. It was Rebecca, my daughter-in-law of 5 years, talking to someone on what sounded like a phone call. Her voice carried that particular tone of annoyance she reserved for conversations she thought no one else could hear. Honestly, Marcus's mother is completely useless. Rebecca's voice came through with startling clarity. She thinks she's helping, but she just gets in the way of everything. I swear if she offers to babysit Emma one more time, I might lose it. The woman can barely take care of herself, let alone a 3-year-old. And don't even get me started on her cooking attempts. Last week she brought over this casserole that looked like something the dog wouldn't even touch. I felt my hands begin to tremble as I listened. Miss Chen had apparently been in her backyard when Rebecca was pacing on their deck during this phone conversation, speaking louder than she realized. Marcus keeps defending her, saying she's just trying to help because she's lonely since Harold died, but I think she's just desperate for attention. The way she clings to our family is honestly pathetic. I've been trying to hint that maybe she should find some hobbies or friends her own age, but she's too dense to get it. Some people just don't know when they're not wanted. The recording continued for another minute, but I had heard enough. I set the phone down on the side table and stared at the wall where Harold's photograph hung, the one from our 40th wedding anniversary just 2 years before he passed. In that moment, I felt something inside me crack, not from heartbreak, but from the sudden clarity of realization. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, and at 68 years old, I thought I had seen enough of life's surprises. I had raised 3 children, buried my beloved husband of 45 years, survived breast cancer, and built a successful career as a high school English teacher before retiring. If someone had told me that my carefully constructed post-retirement life would be turned upside down by my own daughter-in-law's cruel words, I would have laughed and told them they watched too many soap operas. But here I was, sitting in the home Harold and I had lovingly restored over decades, listening to a woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms describe me as useless, pathetic, and unwanted. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves, it was the casual cruelty in her tone, as if discussing my failures was as natural as commenting on the weather. I had always prided myself on being perceptive. 40 years in the classroom teaches you to read people, to notice the subtle signs when someone is lying, struggling, or hiding something. Yet somehow, I had completely missed the fact that Rebecca had been playing a part around me for 5 entire years. Every smile, every thanks for helping Mom, every invitation to family dinners had apparently been nothing more than elaborate theater. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman calling me useless when I had spent the last 5 years bending over backwards to be useful to her family. I had babysitted Emma countless times, often on short notice when Rebecca decided she needed me time or when she and Marcus wanted to go out. I had prepared meals when Rebecca claimed she was too tired to cook, which seemed to happen at least twice a week. I had helped with Emma's birthday parties, school events, and even Rebecca's own birthday celebrations, often paying for expenses that I later realized they simply expected me to cover. When Emma had the flu last winter, and Rebecca panicked about missing work, who had she called? Me. When their washing machine broke and they needed somewhere to do laundry for 2 weeks while waiting for the repair, whose house had they used? Mine. When Rebecca wanted to take a girls' trip to Napa Valley with her sisters but couldn't afford the full cost, who had quietly slipped Marcus $500 to help make it happen? Me again, but apparently, none of that mattered. I was still just the useless old woman who got in the way. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, my mind racing as I processed what I had heard. The house felt different now, as if the recording had somehow altered the very air inside. This was the same kitchen where I had prepared countless meals for Rebecca and Mark, where I had spent hours helping Emma with coloring books while Rebecca napped upstairs, where I had listened to Rebecca's complaints about everything from her job to her neighbors to Marcus's supposed shortcomings as a husband. All those conversations took on a new meaning now. I remembered how Rebecca would sigh dramatically when I offered to help with anything, as if my assistance was a burden rather than a gift. I thought about the way she would exchange glances with Marcus when I suggested family activities, looks I had interpreted as loving communication between spouses, but now realized might have been something else entirely. The more I thought about it, the more examples came flooding back. There was the time I had offered to host Thanksgiving dinner, and Rebecca had said they already had plans, but then I found out later they had ordered Chinese takeout and eaten alone. There was the Christmas when I spent hours finding the perfect gifts for everyone, only to watch Rebecca return most of them the following week. There was the Mother's Day when I waited all day for a call or visit that never came, while Rebecca posted photos on social media of her elaborate celebration with her own mother. I had made excuses for all of it. Rebecca was busy with work. Rebecca was stressed about money. Rebecca was still adjusting to having a mother-in-law after growing up in a single-parent household. I had been so determined to be understanding, so afraid of being the stereotypical overbearing mother-in-law, that I had apparently become something worse, the pushover mother-in-law, who allowed herself to be used and discarded at will. Harold used to tell me that my biggest strength and weakness was the same thing. I always assumed the best in people. Maggie, he would say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, you could find something good to say about the devil himself if you tried hard enough. He meant it as a compliment, but sitting there in our kitchen, I wondered if perhaps he had also been trying to warn me. I thought about calling Marcus immediately, demanding an explanation, asking how long he had known that his wife felt this way about me, but something held me back. Maybe it was the teacher in me, the part that had learned never to react in anger, to always gather all the facts before making a decision. Or maybe it was something deeper, a growing realization that this situation required more than just an emotional confrontation. Instead, I decided to do what I did best: observe and analyze. If Rebecca thought I was useless, perhaps it was time to test that theory. If she found my help burdensome, maybe she would appreciate its absence. If my presence in their lives was as unwelcome as she seemed to believe, then maybe it was time to give her exactly what she apparently wanted. I pulled out a notebook, one of the many I had accumulated over my teaching years, and began to write. At the top of the first page, I wrote, Rebecca's opinion versus reality, and drew a line down the middle. On the left side, I listed everything Rebecca had said about me in that recording. On the right side, I began documenting everything I had actually done for their family over the past 5 years. The list on the right side grew longer and longer. Emergency babysitting sessions, grocery runs when they were too busy, help with household repairs that Marcus didn't have time for, financial assistance that was never discussed but always appreciated, emotional support during Rebecca's difficult periods at work, help with Emma's potty training when Rebecca was at her wits' end, and dozens of other large and small contributions to their daily lives. By the time I finished writing, it was nearly midnight, and I had filled 6 pages. The contrast was stark and undeniable. While Rebecca saw me as a useless burden, the reality was that I had been functioning as an unpaid nanny, housekeeper, cook, babysitter, and financial safety net for her family. But the most painful realization wasn't about the work I had done or the money I had spent. It was about the love I had given so freely, only to discover it had been received with resentment and disdain. I had genuinely believed that Rebecca and I were building a relationship, that she appreciated having a mother figure in her life after losing her own mother so young. I had thought that our conversations over coffee, our shopping trips together, our shared concern for Emma's well-being, all of it meant something. Apparently I had been wrong about everything. I closed the notebook and sat in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime. This house had seen so much joy and sorrow, so many family gatherings and quiet moments. Harold and I had planned to spend our golden years here, watching our grandchildren grow up, being the kind of involved but respectful grandparents we had always wanted to be. He had died before seeing most of those dreams come true. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But I had tried to carry on his vision of family closeness and mutual support. Now I wondered if Harold would have seen through Rebecca's performance from the beginning. He had always been more skeptical than me, more willing to call out bad behavior when he saw it. But he had also died just 6 months before Marcus and Rebecca's wedding, so he never really had the chance to get to know her well. Maybe that had been a blessing in disguise. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, and I made a decision. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I stopped trying to prove my worth to someone who had already decided I had none. If Rebecca thought I was useless, then she was about to discover just how much use I had actually been providing. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept replaying moments from the past 5 years, reinterpreting conversations and interactions through this new lens of understanding. How many times had Rebecca complained to her friends about me? How many eye rolls and sighs had I missed? How many ways had she been telling me I wasn't wanted without me, even realizing it? But somewhere between midnight and dawn, my hurt began transforming into something else: determination. I had survived Harold's death, cancer treatments, and decades of managing difficult teenagers in my classroom. I certainly wasn't going to let my son's ungrateful wife reduce me to tears in my own home. By morning I had a plan. I woke up early, as had been my habit for over 40 years, and made my usual pot of coffee. But instead of checking my phone for messages from Rebecca about potential babysitting needs or family plans, I turned it off completely. Today was Thursday, which meant Rebecca typically dropped Emma off with me around 10 a.m. so she could go to her weekly yoga class and lunch with friends. It was a routine we had established months ago, one that I had never questioned because I loved spending time with my granddaughter. But today things would be different. At exactly 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I watched through the window as Rebecca stood on my front porch with Emma, both of them bundled up against the October chill. Rebecca was wearing her expensive yoga outfit, the one I had complimented just last week, and checking her phone impatiently. Emma was clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit and looking excited to see her grandmother. The sight of Emma made my heart ache. None of this was her fault, and she would inevitably be caught in the middle of whatever was about to unfold. But I had to remind myself that protecting Emma from her mother's attitudes might actually require some difficult decisions now, rather than continued enabling. I let the doorbell ring 3 times before I finally answered, opening the door just wide enough to see them, but not wide enough to invite them in. "Oh good, you're here," Rebecca said without preamble. "I was worried you might have forgotten. I'm already running late for class, and then I have lunch reservations at that new place downtown. You remember I told you about it, right?" She hadn't told me about any lunch reservations, but that was typical Rebecca. She often provided incomplete information, and then acted as if I should have somehow known the details anyway. "Actually, Rebecca, I won't be able to watch Emma today," I said calmly. Rebecca blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean? We've had this planned for weeks." "I have other commitments today," I replied, which was technically true. I was committed to beginning my new approach to our relationship. "Other commitments?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly. "What could you possibly have to do that's more important than watching your granddaughter?" The question revealed everything about how she viewed my life and my time. The assumption that I had nothing better to do than wait around for her convenience was so deeply ingrained that she couldn't even conceive of an alternative. "I'm sorry, but I'm simply not available today," I repeated. "Perhaps you could ask your sister or find another babysitter." Emma looked up at her mother with confusion. "Aren't we going to see Grandma Maggie today, Mommy?" "I don't know what's gotten into your grandmother, sweetheart," Rebecca said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "She's being very selfish today." The word selfish hung in the air between us like a challenge. Here was a woman who had just called me useless, pathetic, and unwanted behind my back, now calling me selfish for not providing free childcare at her convenience. "I hope you find a solution that works for you," I said politely, and then I closed the door. I watched through the window as Rebecca stood on my porch for several more minutes, apparently waiting for me to change my mind. She made 2 phone calls, both of which seemed to go to voicemail based on her increasingly frustrated expressions. Finally, she loaded Emma back into her car and drove away. My phone, which I had turned back on, immediately began buzzing with text messages from Rebecca. "I can't believe you just did that. Emma is heartbroken and confused. I had to cancel my entire day because of your selfishness. What is wrong with you today? Marcus is going to hear about this." I read each message calmly, and then deleted them without responding. If Rebecca wanted to involve Marcus in this situation, that was her choice, but I wasn't going to engage in a text message argument that would inevitably be used against me later. Sure enough, my phone rang an hour later. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I could already imagine the conversation Rebecca had prompted. "Mom, what's going on?" Marcus's voice carried that particular tone of exhaustion that had become increasingly common in our conversations over the past year. "Rebecca said you refused to watch Emma today," without any explanation. "I told Rebecca I had other commitments today," I said simply. "That's explanation enough." "But Mom, she had to cancel her yoga class and everything. You know how important that class is to her stress management." Rebecca's yoga class cost more per session than I spent on groceries in a week, but I had never commented on their financial priorities before. Apparently my silence had been interpreted as approval. "I'm sorry she had to change her plans, but I'm not always going to be available at her convenience," I replied. "What do you mean, not always available? You never have anything else going on Thursday?" There it was again, that assumption that my life was empty except for whatever role they needed me to play. The idea that I might have interests, plans, or priorities of my own seemed genuinely foreign to both of them. "Marcus, I think we need to have a conversation about expectations," I said carefully, "but not over the phone. Why don't you come by this weekend, and we can talk properly?" "Expectations? Mom, what's this really about?" "Rebecca thinks you might be having some kind of episode or something. She's worried about you." The manipulation was so smooth I almost admired it. In less than 2 hours Rebecca had managed to transform herself from the person who needed a favor into the concerned daughter-in-law worried about her mother-in-law's mental health. It was a masterful performance, and one that might have worked if I hadn't heard her true feelings so clearly the night before. "I'm perfectly fine, Marcus, but yes, we do need to talk. This weekend, when you have time for a real conversation." "Okay, but Mom, in the meantime, could you maybe text Rebecca back? She's really upset, and I'm trying to keep the peace here." "Of course you are," I said, and something in my tone must have surprised him because he was quiet for a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, sweetheart. We'll talk this weekend." After I hung up, I sat in my living room and looked around at the home Harold and I had built together. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every carefully chosen decoration told the story of a life well lived and love well shared. This was my sanctuary, my refuge, the place where I was supposed to feel most valued and secure. But somehow, over the past 5 years I had allowed it to become a free service center for my son's family. Rebecca treated my home like her personal extension, a place where she could drop off her daughter, pick up free meals, and complain about her problems without any reciprocal consideration for my time, energy, or feeling. I thought about Harold and what he would say if he could see how I had been allowing myself to be treated. He had always been my strongest supporter, my fiercest defender, and my most honest critic. He wouldn't have tolerated Rebecca's behavior for 5 minutes, let alone 5 years. "Maggie," I could almost hear him saying, "when someone shows you who they are, believe them." Rebecca had been showing me who she was all along. I had just been too willing to make excuses, too desperate to maintain family harmony, too afraid of being seen as the difficult mother-in-law to pay attention to what was right in front of me. But now I knew exactly who Rebecca was, and more importantly, I was beginning to remember who I was too. I was Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who had commanded respect in her classroom, who had raised 3 successful children, who had nursed her husband through his final illness with grace and strength, who had beaten cancer and come out stronger on the other side. I was not pathetic, and I was certainly not unwanted, except by one person whose opinion was beginning to matter less and less with each passing hour. The rest of Thursday passed quietly. I spent the afternoon reading a novel I had been meaning to finish for months, something I rarely had time for because I was usually busy responding to Rebecca's various requests and needs. I made myself a proper dinner, set the table with my good china, and enjoyed a meal in peaceful solitude. My phone buzzed occasionally with more messages from Rebecca, but I had learned my lesson about engaging with her when she was in manipulative mode. Instead, I focused on rediscovering what my life could look like when it wasn't constantly interrupted by other people's emergencies and demands. Friday morning brought a new development. Rebecca showed up at my door again, this time without Emma. "Margaret, we need to talk," she said when I answered the door. The use of my full name instead of Mom was clearly intended to signal displeasure. "Of course, dear. Come in." She followed me into the living room, where I gestured toward the sofa while I took my usual chair. For a moment we sat in silence, and I could see Rebecca gathering her thoughts for what was clearly going to be a prepared speech. "I'm concerned about you," she began, her voice taking on the patronizing tone usually reserved for speaking to children or elderly relatives. "Your behavior yesterday was very out of character, and Marcus and I are worried that you might be dealing with some depression or maybe early signs of dementia." The accusation hung in the air between us like a weapon. Rebecca was essentially suggesting that any deviation from my usual compliance must be a sign of mental illness. It was a clever strategy, one that would allow her to dismiss any legitimate complaints I might have, while simultaneously positioning herself as the caring, concerned daughter-in-law. "That's very thoughtful of you to be concerned," I replied calmly, "but I can assure you that my mental faculties are perfectly intact." "Are they though?" Rebecca leaned forward, her expression a practiced blend of sympathy and authority. "Because yesterday you abandoned your granddaughter without warning, and you've been acting very strange ever since. Maybe you should see a doctor, just to be safe." I looked at this woman sitting in my living room, attempting to gaslight me into believing that setting boundaries was a sign of mental illness, and I felt something crystallize inside me. This was the moment of choice, the crossroads where I could either return to my old patterns of accommodation and apology, or step into something new and unknown. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "what would you say if I told you that I heard your phone conversation Wednesday night?" The change in her expression was immediate and telling. The practiced concern vanished, replaced by something much more genuine, panic. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "Miss Chen was in her backyard when you were on your deck, talking to someone about how useless and pathetic I am. She recorded it and sent it to me." Rebecca's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, resignation. For a moment I saw past the performance to the real person underneath, and what I saw wasn't particularly pleasant. "Okay," she said, finally. "So you heard that. Look, I was venting to my sister. Everyone needs to blow off steam sometimes." "It doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" I asked, because it seemed to mean quite a lot. "You called me useless, pathetic, dense, and unwanted. You said I was desperate for attention and didn't know when I wasn't welcome. That sounds like it means something to me." "You're taking it all out of context," Rebecca said, her tone becoming defensive. "I was having a bad day, and I said some things I didn't mean. We all do that, do we?" I tilted my head slightly, a gesture I had perfected during 40 years of dealing with students who tried to lie their way out of trouble. "Because you seemed very specific about your complaint, very detailed about all the ways I bother you and get in your way." Rebecca sat back against the sofa cushions, clearly realizing that her usual strategies weren't working. "Fine, maybe I was a little harsh, but you have to understand, it's hard having a mother-in-law who's involved all the time." "Involved," I repeated. "Is that what you call babysitting Emma, 3 times a week, bringing you meals when you're too tired to cook, helping with birthday parties and school events, and providing financial assistance whenever you need it?" "Those are things you offered to do," Rebecca said quickly. "I never asked you to do any of that." It was a fascinating attempt at revisionist history. In Rebecca's version of events, I was apparently some kind of helicopter mother-in-law who forced my unwanted help on their grateful family, rather than someone who had responded to their constant requests for assistance. "You're right," I said, and I saw relief flash across her face before I continued. I did offer to do those things, but I offered because I thought we were family, and that's what family does for each other. I thought you appreciated my help. I do appreciate it, Rebecca said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. No, you don't, and that's okay, Rebecca. You're entitled to your feelings, but what you're not entitled to is my continued assistance while you mock me behind my back. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Harold's grandfather clock. Rebecca seemed to be processing the implications of what I had just said, and I could almost see her mind working through different angles of approach. So what are you saying exactly? She asked finally. I'm saying that if you find my help useless, and my presence burdensome, then perhaps it's time I stepped back and gave you the space you clearly want. You can't just abandon your granddaughter because you're upset with me, Rebecca said, and there was real anger in her voice now. That's not fair to Emma. I'm not abandoning anyone, but I am going to stop pretending that our current arrangement is working for everyone involved. You've made it clear that you don't want my help, so I'm going to respect that. I never said I didn't want your help, Rebecca protested. I just said, look, can't we just forget about this whole thing? I'll be more careful about what I say, and we can go back to normal. But that was exactly what I couldn't do. I couldn't go back to normal, couldn't pretend I hadn't heard her true feelings, couldn't continue participating in a relationship built on her resentment and my ignorance. I don't think we can go back, Rebecca. Too much has been said, and too much has been revealed. But we can move forward differently. What does that mean? It means that from now on, our interactions are going to be based on mutual respect and clear communication. No more assumptions, no more unspoken expectations, and no more taking advantage of my willingness to help. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to continue arguing or switch to a different strategy. Finally, she stood up. I think you're overreacting, she said, but if this is how you want to handle things, fine. Just remember that Marcus isn't going to be happy about any of this. Marcus and I will work things out between us, I replied. That's not your concern. Everything that affects this family is my concern, Rebecca shot back, and there it was, the real Rebecca, the one who saw herself as the center of everyone else's universe. You're absolutely right, I said, standing as well, and that's exactly the problem. After Rebecca left, I felt simultaneously drained and energized. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. For the first time in 5 years I had spoken my truth to her directly, without trying to soften it, or make it more palatable. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. Rebecca would undoubtedly go straight to Marcus with her version of events, and I needed to be prepared for the conversation that would inevitably follow. More importantly, I needed to decide exactly what I wanted my relationship with their family to look like going forward. The old Margaret would have spent the rest of the day, second-guessing herself, wondering if she had been too harsh, too unforgiving, too demanding. But the new Margaret, the one who had been awakened by Rebecca's cruel words, felt something she hadn't experienced in years: self-respect. I was done being useful to people who found me useless. I was done being generous to people who saw my generosity as pathetic. And I was done sacrificing my own dignity to maintain peace in a relationship that had never been peaceful at all, just one-sided. The afternoon sun streamed through my living room windows, illuminating the photographs of my family that covered the mantelpiece. Harold's smile seemed to encourage me from his favorite picture, the one taken on our last anniversary. My children as babies, as graduates, as adults, starting their own families, generations of love and support and shared memory. This house had always been the heart of our family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations, where grandchildren came to be spoiled and comforted, where tradition and stability lived. I had assumed that would continue indefinitely, that Rebecca would eventually come to appreciate what I was offering, and accept her place in the family legacy. But I was beginning to realize that Rebecca had never wanted to be part of our family legacy. She wanted to be the center of her own universe, with everyone else, including me, serving as supporting characters in her personal drama. Well, I was done auditioning for a role in someone else's story. It was time to remember that I was the author of my own life, and I had let someone else hold the pen for far too long. As evening approached, I made myself dinner and settled in to wait for the next chapter to begin. Because one thing I knew for certain, Rebecca would not let this end quietly. She was used to getting her way, used to having her version of events accepted without question, used to being the victim in every conflict. But she had never dealt with a retired English teacher who had spent 4 decades managing difficult personalities and refusing to accept excuses for bad behavior. She was about to discover that calling someone useless and then expecting their continued service was a strategy that only worked as long as the other person was willing to play along. And I was officially done playing along. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected phone call from my daughter Sarah, who lived 2 hours away in Portland. Her voice carried an edge of concern that immediately put me on alert. "Mom, Marcus called me last night. He's really worried about you. He said Rebecca thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown or memory issues." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, already exhausted by the thought of having to explain myself to yet another family member who had received Rebecca's carefully crafted version of events. "Did he tell you what supposedly prompted this concern?" I asked. "He said you refused to babysit Emma without any explanation, and then accused Rebecca of saying terrible things about you that she never said." "Mom, that doesn't sound like you at all." The manipulation was breathtaking in its efficiency. In less than 48 hours, Rebecca had managed to contact multiple family members with a story that portrayed me as an unreliable grandmother who was either losing my mind or fabricating conflicts for attention. "Sarah, I want you to come over today. There's something you need to hear." "I can't today. Mom, the kids have soccer games, and Tom has to work. But maybe next weekend." "No, today. This is important. Bring the kids if you need to, but this conversation can't wait another week." Something in my tone must have convinced her because she agreed to drive over after lunch. I spent the morning preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation, one that would likely change how my daughter viewed her brother's marriage, and possibly our family dynamics forever. When Sarah arrived with my twin grandsons, 8-year-old Jake and Joey, I could see the worry etched on her face. She looked like she was preparing to stage an intervention for a family member who had lost touch with reality. "Boys, why don't you go play in the backyard for a while?" I suggested. "Grandma and Mommy need to have a grown-up talk." Once we were alone, I pulled out my phone and played Mrs. Chen's recording for Sarah. I watched my daughter's expression change from skeptical concern to shock to anger as Rebecca's voice filled my living room with its casual cruelty. "Oh my God, Mom," Sarah whispered when the recording ended. "I can't believe she said those things about you." "There's more," I said, and I told her about the conversation I'd had with Rebecca the day before, including her attempts to suggest I was suffering from dementia or depression. Sarah sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing what she had heard. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this. I should have known something was wrong." "How could you have known?" She's been very careful to maintain her performance around the family. I didn't realize it myself until I heard her real feelings so clearly. But looking back now, there were signs. The way she would roll her eyes when you offered to help with things. How she always seemed to have an excuse when you invited them to family events. I thought she was just busy or stressed, but now you see what I've been dealing with for 5 years. Sarah shook her head angrily. "And Marcus just goes along with whatever she said." "God, Mom, I feel so stupid for calling you worried about your mental health when I should have been worried about how they've been treating you. Your brother is in a difficult position," I said, though I was beginning to question whether Marcus was as innocent as I had been assuming. "She's his wife, and she's very good at presenting herself as the reasonable one in any conflict. That doesn't excuse him calling family members to suggest you're losing your mind instead of actually talking to you about what happened." Sarah was right, and her anger on my behalf was both comforting and concerning. I didn't want this situation to divide our family permanently, but I also couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine. "What are you going to do, Sarah?" "I'm going to stop allowing myself to be used and disrespected. Beyond that, I'm still figuring it out. Do you want me to talk to Marcus? Because I have some things I'd like to say to him," about his wife's behavior. Not yet. Let me handle Marcus first. But Sarah, I need you to know that things are going to be different going forward. I won't be as available for babysitting and family emergencies as I have been. Good, Sarah said firmly. You've been way too generous with your time and money, and they've been taking advantage of you for years. After Sarah left, taking the boys home for dinner, I felt a sense of relief that at least one of my children understood what was happening. But I also knew that the real test was still to come. Marcus had been largely absent from the conflict so far, allowing Rebecca to handle the communication and manipulation, but eventually, he would have to choose a side. And I wasn't entirely confident which side he would choose. Sunday evening brought the conversation I had been both dreading and anticipating. Marcus arrived alone, which told me that Rebecca had decided to let him handle this family crisis without her direct involvement. It was a strategic choice that allowed her to maintain plausible deniability while still controlling the narrative. "Mom, we need to talk about what's been going on," Marcus said as he settled into Harold's old chair. The irony of him sitting in his father's spot while defending his wife's disrespect wasn't lost on me. "Yes, we do," I agreed. "Where would you like to start?" "I think you should start by explaining why you've been acting so strangely this week. Rebecca is really hurt by the way you've been treating her. Is she, or is she angry that I'm no longer allowing her to treat me badly?" Marcus frowned. "What do you mean, treating you badly? Rebecca has always been respectful to you, has she?" Because I have a recording that suggests otherwise." I played Mrs. Chen's recording for my son, watching his face as his wife's voice filled the room with contempt for his mother. The transformation in his expression was subtle but significant. The defensive posture he had arrived with slowly gave way to something that looked like recognition. "Okay," he said when the recording ended. That's not good. I can see why you're upset. Upset doesn't begin to cover it. Your wife has been lying to my face for 5 years while mocking me behind my back, and when I finally stood up for myself, she tried to convince everyone that I was mentally ill. She didn't mean for you to hear that conversation. Sometimes people say things when they're venting that they don't really mean." I stared at my son, amazed by his ability to minimize his wife's cruelty. "Do you really believe that, Marcus?" Because she was very specific about her complaints. She called me useless, pathetic, dense, and unwanted. Those aren't things you say about someone you respect, even when you're venting. Maybe she was just having a bad day. You know how stressful her job has been lately. Her job has been stressful for the entire 5 years I've known her. That doesn't give her the right to treat me like garbage while accepting my help. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the cognitive dissonance of defending behavior he knew was indefensible. "What do you want me to do, Divorce my wife because she said some mean things about you to her sister. I want you to acknowledge that her behavior is unacceptable and demand that it stop. I want you to recognize that I've been providing significant support to your family, and that support comes with the expectation of basic respect. You have our respect, Mom. Just because Rebecca vented some frustrations doesn't mean she doesn't appreciate everything you do." "Marcus, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for someone who called your mother pathetic and useless. When did I raise you to accept that kind of treatment of family?" "You didn't," he admitted quietly. "But Mom, I have to live with her. I have to think about Emma and keeping our family together, and I have to think about my own dignity and self-respect. I won't continue to be available for someone who despises my presence, but wants my services." "So what are you saying? You're going to cut us off completely?" "I'm saying that our relationship needs to change. I'm no longer going to provide free babysitting, financial assistance, or household help to someone who sees me as a burden. If Rebecca wants those things, she can hire professionals or ask family members who she actually respects." Marcus looked stricken. "But Mom, we depend on your help. I can't afford to pay for childcare 3 times a week. And Rebecca's job requires flexibility that a regular babysitter couldn't provide. That sounds like a problem you and Rebecca need to solve together. It's not my responsibility to subsidize your lifestyle while being treated with contempt." "What about Emma? She loves spending time with you. Are you going to punish her for her mother's mistakes?" The question hit exactly where Marcus intended it to, and I felt a familiar stab of guilt. Emma was innocent in all of this, and I genuinely loved spending time with my granddaughter. But I also couldn't continue enabling a dynamic that was destructive to my own well-being. I'm not punishing Emma, but I'm also not going to use her as an excuse to continue accepting unacceptable behavior from her mother. Emma will still be my granddaughter, and I will still love her and spend time with her, but it will be on terms that don't require me to sacrifice my dignity. I don't understand what that means practically. It means that if you want me to babysit Emma, you or Rebecca will need to ask politely, with adequate notice, and with the understanding that I might say no. It means that if you need financial help, you'll need to be honest about what you're asking for, and grateful for what you receive. It means that Rebecca will need to treat me with the same courtesy she shows to strangers, if not the respect due to a family member. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he had inherited from his father. Mom, I don't think you understand how hard this is going to be for us, and I don't think you understand how hard the last 5 years have been for me. I've been taken for granted, used as free labor, and mocked behind my back by someone I welcomed into our family with open arms. The hardship you're worried about experiencing is nothing compared to what I've already endured. But we never asked you to do all those things. I offered because I thought we were family, and that's what family does for each other. I thought my help was appreciated, and my presence was welcome. I was wrong on both counts. Your presence is welcome. Just because Rebecca said some things she shouldn't have, doesn't mean we don't want you in our lives, but it does mean that the terms of my involvement need to change. I won't continue being useful to people who find me useless. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression, something that looked almost like guilt. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I've been a good son to you? The question surprised me, both in its content and its timing. What do you mean? I mean, looking back on the last few years, do you think I've treated you well, been grateful for everything you've done, stood up for you when I should have? It was the first question he had asked that seemed focused on self-reflection rather than damage control, and I took my time considering my answer. Marcus, I think you're a good man who's been in a difficult situation, but I also think you've allowed your wife to set the tone for how your family treats me, and that tone has been disrespectful and dismissive. Can you give me an example? Remember last Christmas when I spent weeks finding the perfect gifts for everyone, and Rebecca returned most of them the next day? You knew about it, and you said nothing. When I offered to host Thanksgiving dinner and Rebecca lied about having other plans, you went along with the lie rather than telling me the truth. When Rebecca complains about my cooking or my housekeeping or my parenting advice, you stay silent, rather than defending me or asking her to show some courtesy. Marcus winced at each example. I thought I was keeping the peace. You were avoiding conflict at my expense. There's a difference. I never wanted you to feel unappreciated or disrespected, but you allowed it to happen anyway. And when I finally stood up for myself, your first instinct was to call other family members and suggest I might be mentally ill rather than asking me what was wrong. Rebecca said you were acting strange, and I was worried about you. No, Marcus. You were worried about the disruption to your routine. You were worried about losing your free babysitter and wondering how you would manage without me. You weren't worried about my well-being or my feelings. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I could see that it had hit home. Marcus looked genuinely pained, which gave me hope that this conversation might actually lead somewhere productive. You're right, he said finally. I should have talked to you directly instead of assuming Rebecca's version of events was accurate. I should have asked what was bothering you instead of trying to fix the situation without understanding it. Yes, you should have, and I should have stood up for you more over the years. I didn't want to cause problems in my marriage, but you were willing to cause problems in our relationship. I guess I thought you would understand, that you would always forgive me because you're my mother. Being your mother doesn't mean I have unlimited tolerance for disrespect, Marcus. It means I love you enough to tell you when you're making mistakes, even when it's difficult. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had been said. Finally, Marcus spoke again. What can I do to fix this, Mom? You can start by having an honest conversation with your wife about how she's been treating me. Not an argument, not an accusation, but a real discussion about respect and family relationships. And if she won't acknowledge that she's done anything wrong, then you'll have to decide what matters more to you, keeping your wife happy or maintaining a healthy relationship with your mother. That's not fair. You're asking me to choose between the two most important women in my life. No, Marcus. I'm asking you to insist that the two most important women in your life treat each other with basic courtesy and respect. If Rebecca can't do that, then she's the one creating the choice, not me. Marcus nodded slowly, and I could see him mentally preparing for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation with his wife. What happens if things don't change? He asked. Then I'll continue to love you and Emma from a distance, but I won't continue to provide services to someone who despises my presence. I'll find other ways to spend my time and energy, ways that don't involve being used and mocked. Mom, I don't want to lose you. Then don't. Make sure your wife understands that treating me badly has consequences, and that those consequences affect your entire family. After Marcus left, I felt emotionally drained, but oddly hopeful. For the first time in our conversation, he had seemed to genuinely understand my perspective rather than simply trying to manage the situation. Whether that understanding would translate into meaningful change remained to be seen. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca's sister Jennifer, whom I had met only a handful of times at family gatherings, appeared at my door with a determined expression, and what appeared to be a prepared speech. Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I wanted to talk to you about the situation with Rebecca. I invited her in, curious about what role she was planning to play in this family drama. Jennifer was younger than Rebecca, probably in her late 20s, and had always struck me as more thoughtful and less self-centered than her sister. I understand there's been some conflict between you and Rebecca, she began carefully. I suppose that's one way to put it, I replied. I want you to know that I was the person Rebecca was talking to on the phone that night. The conversation your neighbor recorded. This was an interesting development. I had assumed Rebecca had been venting to a friend or distant relative, not to her sister who had met me and interacted with our family multiple times. I see, and what did you think of what she said about me? Jennifer looked uncomfortable but determined to continue. Honestly, I told her she was being unfair and ungrateful. I've watched how much you do for their family, and I've always thought Rebecca didn't appreciate it enough. But you listened to her mock me without stopping her. I tried to change the subject several times, but Rebecca was really worked up that night. She'd had a fight with Marcus about money, and she was taking it out on everyone around her, including me apparently. Yes, and I'm sorry about that. I should have told her to stop, but I didn't want to make the fight worse. I studied Jennifer's face, trying to determine whether this visit was genuine remorse or another attempt at manipulation, orchestrated by Rebecca. What exactly did you want to talk to me about, Jennifer? I wanted to apologize for my part in the conversation, and to ask if there's anything I can do to help fix this situation. Why do you want to fix it? Because I can see that Rebecca is about to lose something really valuable, and she's too proud or too stubborn to recognize it. She complains about you, but she also relies on you more than she wants to admit. So this is about Rebecca's needs, not about how she's treated me. No, that's not what I meant. What she said about you was cruel and unfair, and you have every right to be angry about it. I just think that maybe if she understood how much she's hurt you, she might be willing to make changes. I appreciated Jennifer's attempt at mediation, but I was skeptical about Rebecca's capacity for genuine change, or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Has Rebecca sent you here to smooth things over? Actually, she doesn't know I'm here. She'd probably be furious if she found out. Then why are you here? Jennifer hesitated for a moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of Rebecca's selfishness, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. She's my sister, and I love her, but she has this way of taking people for granted until she loses them. Has she lost people before? Our mom used to babysit Rebecca's friends' kids all the time when we were teenagers. She did it for free because the friend was going through a difficult divorce and couldn't afford childcare. But then Rebecca heard our mom complaining to our dad about how tired she was and how the friend never even said thank you. Rebecca told the friend what our mom had said, and the friend got angry and stopped speaking to our family. That's remarkably similar to what's happening now. Exactly. And Rebecca never saw that she was the problem in that situation either. She thought our mom was being fake by complaining privately while acting helpful publicly. So Rebecca has a pattern of betraying confidences and destroying relationships. She has a pattern of not understanding boundaries and consequences. She says whatever she's thinking without considering how her words might hurt people or come back to hurt her. And you think I should forgive her because she doesn't understand the impact of her behavior? I think you should consider whether you want to write off a 5-year relationship based on one conversation, even if it was a really hurtful conversation. I looked at Jennifer with new interest. She was clearly more perceptive than I had given her credit for, and she seemed genuinely concerned about the situation, rather than simply trying to manipulate me on Rebecca's behalf. Jennifer, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Rebecca actually wants a relationship with me, or does she just want the services I provide? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how honest to be. I think she wants both, she said finally. But I also think she's never really learned how to maintain relationships with people who don't automatically cater to her needs. That's not my responsibility to teach her. No, but maybe it's worth considering whether she's capable of learning if someone sets clear boundaries and expectations. I've tried setting boundaries, she responds by suggesting I'm mentally ill, because she's never had anyone stick to their boundaries before. Everyone in her life eventually gives in to keep the peace. Well, I'm not going to be one of those people. Good, Jennifer said, surprising me. I think that's exactly what she needs, even if she doesn't realize it. We talked for another hour, and I found myself appreciating Jennifer's perspective more than I had expected. She wasn't excusing Rebecca's behavior, but she was providing context that helped me understand the patterns that had led to our current situation. After Jennifer left, I spent the rest of the day thinking about our conversation. She had raised an interesting question about whether people could change when faced with real consequences for their behavior. I had seen it happen in my classroom many times. Students who seemed hopeless would suddenly improve when they realized that their behavior was going to result in genuine consequences, rather than empty threats. But this wasn't a classroom, and Rebecca wasn't a teenager learning life lessons. She was a grown woman with a family of her own, and I wasn't responsible for teaching her how to treat people with respect. Wednesday brought another development. In the ongoing saga, Marcus called to tell me that he had talked to Rebecca about the recording and my concerns. How did that go? I asked. Not well at first. She was angry that you had shared the recording with other people, and she accused you of trying to turn the family against her. And then, I told her that she had brought this on herself by saying those things in the first place. I said that if she was embarrassed by people hearing what she really thought about you, maybe she should consider why she thought those things at all. I was impressed. This was the first time Marcus had shown any willingness to hold his wife accountable for her behavior, rather than simply trying to manage the fallout. What did she say to that? She cried. She said that she was stressed and overwhelmed, and that sometimes she says things she doesn't mean when she's upset. The same excuse she gave me. Yeah, and I told her that wasn't good enough. I said that stress doesn't give her the right to disrespect my mother, especially when you've been nothing but helpful and generous to our family. I'm proud of you for standing up to her, Marcus. Well, I should have done it years ago. Looking back, I can see that she's been dismissive of you for a long time, and I've been pretending not to notice because it was easier than dealing with the conflict. What happens now? She wants to talk to you, to apologize and try to work things out. I felt a familiar skepticism rising. Does she want to apologize because she recognizes that her behavior was wrong, or because she's realized that her actions have consequences she doesn't like? Honestly, probably the second one, but Mom, maybe that's enough to start with. Maybe if she experiences consequences for treating you badly, she'll learn to treat you better. It was an echo of what Jennifer had suggested, and I found myself wondering if there might be some wisdom in giving Rebecca one more chance to prove she could change her behavior. I'll consider it, I said. But any conversation we have will be on my terms, in my home, with clear expectations about what needs to change going forward. Fair enough, I'll let her know. That evening, I called my friend Eleanor, who had been my closest confidant since Harold's death. Eleanor was a retired social worker who had spent her career dealing with difficult family dynamics, and I valued her perspective on complicated interpersonal situations. "So let me get this straight," Eleanor said after I had filled her in on the latest developments. "This woman has been treating you like hired help for 5 years, mocking you behind your back, and trying to convince people you're mentally ill when you stand up for yourself. And now she wants to apologize because she's afraid of losing her free babysitter." That's one way to look at it. Is there another way to look at it? Marcus and Rebecca's sister both think she might be capable of changing if she faces real consequences for her behavior. And what do you think? I considered the question carefully. I think she's capable of changing her behavior temporarily to get what she wants, but I don't think she's capable of changing her fundamental attitude toward me. Then why are you considering giving her another chance? Because I love my son and my granddaughter, and I want to believe that people can grow and change when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. That's very generous of you, Margaret, but remember that you don't owe anyone a relationship that diminishes your self-respect. I know, but I also don't want to give up on my family without trying everything possible to make it work. Just promise me that you'll go into any conversation with realistic expectations and clear boundaries. I promise. After I hung up with Eleanor, I sat in my living room, looking at the photographs that documented decades of family history. Harold and I on our wedding day, young and hopeful and certain that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Our children as babies, toddlers, school children, graduates, Marcus and Rebecca's wedding, where I had welcomed her into our family with such optimism and affection. How had we gotten from there to here? How had a relationship that began with such promise deteriorated into something so toxic and painful? Part of the answer, I realized, lay in my own behavior over the past 5 years. In my eagerness to be the perfect mother-in-law, I had ignored warning signs and enabled patterns that should have been addressed early on. I had prioritized peace over respect, harmony over honesty, and Rebecca's comfort over my own dignity. But recognizing my own role in creating the situation didn't mean I was responsible for fixing it alone. Rebecca was an adult who had made choices about how to treat me, and those choices had consequences. Whether she was willing to genuinely change her behavior remained to be seen. Thursday morning, Rebecca called to ask if she could come over that afternoon to talk. Her voice was subdued, lacking the confident edge I had become accustomed to hearing. "Of course," I said. 2 o'clock would work well for me. "Thank you, Marg. I know you don't owe me this conversation, and I appreciate you being willing to have it." The acknowledgement surprised me. It was the first time Rebecca had ever suggested that my time and consideration weren't things she was entitled to receive. I spent the morning preparing for what I expected would be a challenging conversation. I made notes about the specific changes I would need to see in Rebecca's behavior, the boundaries I would need her to respect, and the consequences that would follow if she couldn't meet these expectations. At exactly 2 o'clock, Rebecca knocked on my door. When I opened it, I was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the confident, slightly impatient expression I had become used to seeing. Instead, she looked nervous, uncertain, and younger than her 32 years. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the living room. We sat in the same chairs we had occupied during our previous confrontation, but the dynamic felt completely different. Rebecca seemed smaller somehow, less sure of herself and her position in the conversation. "I want to start by apologizing," she said without preamble. "What I said about you to my sister was cruel and unfair, and I'm deeply sorry that you had to hear it." "I appreciate the apology," I replied carefully, "but I'm more interested in understanding why you said those things in the first place." Rebecca looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't have a good excuse for it. I was frustrated about some things in my life, and I took it out on you unfairly." "What kinds of things were you frustrated about?" "Money, mostly. Marcus and I have been arguing about our budget, and I was feeling stressed about how much we depend on other people for help." "Other people meaning me?" "Yes, among others. My parents help us sometimes too, and Rebecca's parents, and it makes me feel like we're not really independent adults." This was a perspective I hadn't considered before. It had never occurred to me that my help might make Rebecca feel inadequate or dependent, rather than support. Did you ever consider talking to me about these feelings instead of mocking me behind my back? I should have, but I didn't know how to bring it up without seeming ungrateful. So instead you complained about me to your sister? I know how that sounds. And I know it was wrong. I was venting my frustrations in the worst possible way. I studied Rebecca's face, trying to determine whether her remorse was genuine or performative. She seemed genuinely uncomfortable, but I had learned not to trust my initial impressions of her emotional state. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. The words you used weren't just expressions of frustration. You called me useless, pathetic, dense, and unwanted. You said I was desperate for attention and didn't know when I wasn't welcome. Those aren't things you say about someone you respect, even when you're upset. You're right, and I'm ashamed of saying them. I don't really think you're those things. Don't you? Because you were very specific about your complaints, and they seemed to reflect opinions you'd been holding for a while. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with how honest to be. I guess I have felt frustrated sometimes about the frequency of your offers to help, she said finally. Sometimes it felt like you were trying to take over aspects of our life that I wanted to handle myself. Can you give me an example? Like with Emma's birthday party last year. You had so many ideas about decorations and activities, and I felt like I couldn't say no without seeming ungrateful. But I had my own vision for how I wanted to celebrate her birthday. This was news to me. I had thought Rebecca appreciated my suggestions and assistance with the party plan. Why didn't you tell me that at the time? Because I didn't want to hurt your feelings, and I wasn't sure how to say that I wanted to do it myself without making it sound like I didn't want your help at all. So instead you let me spend time and money on things you didn't want, and then complained about it behind my back. I know that was wrong. I should have been more direct about what I wanted and didn't want. Yes, you should. But Rebecca, the bigger problem isn't that you had different preferences about party planning. The problem is the way you've been talking about me and treating me. I know, and I want to do better. I want to find a way to have a healthy relationship with you. What does that look like to you? I don't know exactly, but I think it starts with better communication. If I'm feeling overwhelmed by offers of help, I need to say that directly, instead of just accepting everything and then resenting it. That's a start. But Rebecca, I also need you to understand that respect isn't negotiable. You can have preferences about the kind of help you want, or don't want, but you can't speak about me the way you did, and expect our relationship to continue. I understand that, do you? Because when I confronted you about the recording, your first response was to suggest that I was mentally ill. That's not the response of someone who understands that they've done something wrong. Rebecca winced. I was defensive and embarrassed, and I reacted badly. But I know that was wrong too. We talked for another hour, covering everything from specific incidents over the past 5 years, to general expectations about how we would interact going forward. Rebecca seemed genuinely committed to changing her behavior, but I remained skeptical about whether she could sustain those changes when they required ongoing effort, rather than a single apology. I have a proposal, I said as our conversation wound down. Okay, I'm willing to give our relationship another chance, but it's going to be on different terms than before. I will no longer be automatically available for babysitting or other help. If you need assistance with something, you'll need to ask politely and accept that I might say no. I will no longer provide financial help without being asked directly and thanked appropriately, and I will no longer tolerate disrespectful treatment, whether it's to my face or behind my back. That seems fair. Furthermore, if I find out that you're speaking about me disrespectfully again, or if you revert to your old patterns of taking my help for granted, our relationship will be permanently reduced to polite interactions at family gatherings. I won't be cruel or vindictive, but I also won't continue to invest in a relationship with someone who doesn't value me. I understand. I hope you do, Rebecca, because this is your one chance to prove that you can change. I won't be giving you another one. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she turned back to me with a question that surprised me. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think you could ever forgive me completely, or will this always be between us? It was a more perceptive question than I had expected from her, and one that I hadn't fully considered myself. I think forgiveness is something that develops over time, through changed behavior. I said. Right now I'm willing to give you the opportunity to rebuild my trust. Whether that leads to complete forgiveness depends on what you do with that opportunity. After Rebecca left, I felt cautiously optimistic but still wary. The conversation had gone better than I had expected, and she had seemed genuinely remorseful about her behavior. But I had also learned not to trust Rebecca's performances, and I knew that the real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, when the novelty of our confrontation wore off and old patterns tried to reassert themselves. I called Marcus that evening to let him know how the conversation had gone. "I'm glad she apologized," he said. "Do you think she meant it?" "I think she meant it in the moment. Whether she'll mean it next week or next month remains to be seen. What can I do to help make sure things improve?" "Hold her accountable. If you see her falling back into old patterns of taking me for granted, or speaking about me disrespectfully, call her out on it immediately. Don't wait for me to say something, I can do that. And Marcus, I need you to understand that I'm serious about the consequences I outlined. If Rebecca can't maintain respectful behavior consistently, I will step back from your family permanently. I won't be drawn into ongoing drama or repeated cycles of conflict and apology." 3 months passed before I knew whether Rebecca's apology had been genuine or simply another performance. During that time, I watched carefully as our family dynamics slowly shifted in ways both subtle and significant. The first real test came 2 weeks after our conversation, when Rebecca called to ask if I could watch Emma for an evening. Her tone was different, more hesitant and polite than the demanding expectation I had grown accustomed to. "Margaret, I was wondering if you might be available to babysit Emma this Friday evening. Marcus and I haven't had a date night in a while, but I completely understand if you have other plans." The change in approach was striking. Instead of assuming my availability, she was actually asking and acknowledging that I might have my own life and commitments. "What time were you thinking?" I asked. "We were hoping to go to dinner around 7, so maybe 6:30 to 10:30. But if that's too late or too long, we could do something shorter." "That should work fine. I'll plan on 6:30. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I know Emma will be excited to spend time with you." When Friday evening arrived, Rebecca and Marcus both came to drop off Emma instead of just one of them running in quickly as had been their usual pattern. Rebecca had packed Emma's overnight bag more thoughtfully than usual, including extra clothes, her favorite snacks, and clear instructions about bedtime routines. "Thank you again for doing this," Rebecca said as they prepared to leave. "It means a lot to both of us to know Emma is with someone who loves her." After they left, I spent a lovely evening with Emma, reading stories and playing games without feeling like I was being taken for granted or performing a service that went unappreciated. When Rebecca and Marcus returned, they both seemed genuinely grateful and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. The second test came a month later when Emma caught a stomach bug and Rebecca needed to miss work to care for her. In the past, Rebecca would have called me expecting immediate assistance, but this time she called to update me on Emma's condition and ask if I had any advice about managing her symptoms. "I don't want to impose on you since I know you've been exposed to whatever she has," Rebecca said, "but I wondered if you had suggestions for keeping her hydrated when she can't keep anything down." "I could come over and help if you'd like," I offered. "I'm not worried about catching anything at my age." "Are you sure? I know it's not pleasant to be around sick children." "I'm sure. I'll be there in an hour." When I arrived, I found Rebecca looking genuinely overwhelmed and grateful for assistance rather than entitled to it. She thanked me repeatedly throughout the day and insisted on sending me home with leftovers from the soup she had made. "I don't know what I would have done without your help today," she said. "Emma always feels better when you're here." These small interactions began to build a foundation of mutual respect that we had never achieved before. Rebecca was making an effort to be considerate and appreciative, and I found myself more willing to offer help when it was requested rather than demanded. But the most significant change came during Emma's 4th birthday party in December. Instead of overwhelming me with ideas and expectations as she had in previous years, Rebecca asked for my input and then actually listened to my suggestions. "I was thinking about having a princess theme," she said when we were planning the party, "but I'd love to hear your thoughts on decorations and activities." "A princess theme sounds wonderful. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I thought maybe we could set up different stations where the kids could do princess activities. Maybe face painting, making tiaras, that sort of thing. Those sound like great ideas. I could help with the face painting if you'd like. I've gotten pretty good at it over the years. That would be amazing. I was worried about trying to manage all the activities myself. We worked together to plan and execute a party that felt collaborative rather than dominated by either of our visions. Rebecca seemed genuinely pleased with the results, and I felt valued for my contributions rather than taken for granted. "Thank you for helping make Emma's day so special," Rebecca said as we cleaned up afterward. "I couldn't have done this without you. It was my pleasure. I love seeing Emma happy. I know you do, and I'm grateful that she has a grandmother who cares about her so much." The sincerity in Rebecca's voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were building something positive together rather than merely managing ongoing tension. As winter turned to spring, I noticed that Marcus was also changing in how he interacted with both Rebecca and me. He had begun speaking up when Rebecca's old patterns tried to resurface, gently but firmly redirecting conversations that veered toward criticism or taking things for granted. One evening when I was having dinner with their family, Rebecca started to complain about the cost of childcare for a work conference she needed to attend. "I just don't understand why babysitters charge so much for what they do," she said. "It's not like watching one well-behaved child is particularly difficult." "Rebecca," Marcus said quietly, "you might want to think about what you just said." I watched as Rebecca's face changed, realizing that she had fallen back into her old pattern of devaluing childcare while expecting me to provide it for free. "You're right," she said, turning to me. "I'm sorry, Margaret. That was thoughtless of me to say, especially considering how much time you've spent caring for Emma over the years." "Thank you for the apology," I replied, "and if you need help with childcare for your conference, we can discuss it separately." These moments of accountability were small but significant, showing that both Rebecca and Marcus were committed to maintaining the changes we had all worked to implement. The real proof of transformation came during Easter Sunday dinner at my house. I had invited the whole family, including Sarah and her boys, for a traditional celebration. As I was preparing the meal, Rebecca appeared in my kitchen. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "I think I have everything under control, but thank you for offering." "Are you sure? I know you've been cooking all day, and I'd hate for you to be exhausted when your guests arrive." The consideration in her voice was genuine, and I realized that this was the first time Rebecca had ever offered to help with meal preparation without being asked. "Actually, if you could help me get the desserts organized, that would be wonderful." We worked together in my kitchen, talking comfortably about Emma's progress in preschool and Rebecca's new position at work. The conversation felt natural and unforced, without the underlying tension that had characterized our interactions for so many years. During dinner, I watched Rebecca interact with my entire family. She was polite to Sarah, engaging with the boys, and helpful with serving and cleaning up. She seemed relaxed and genuinely happy to be part of our family gathering rather than enduring it as an obligation. "This has been such a lovely day," Rebecca said, as they prepared to leave. "Thank you for including us in your Easter tradition." "Thank you for being here," I replied. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." As I cleaned up that evening, I reflected on how dramatically our relationship had changed. The woman who had once called me useless and pathetic was now someone I could work alongside comfortably, someone who showed genuine appreciation for my efforts and consideration for my feelings. But perhaps more importantly, I had changed too. I was no longer the pushover grandmother who accepted disrespect in order to maintain peace. I had learned to value myself enough to demand basic courtesy, and I had discovered that setting boundaries actually improved my relationships rather than destroying them. The final confirmation of our transformed dynamic came during summer vacation when Rebecca called with an unusual request. "Margaret, I have a favor to ask, but I want you to feel completely free to say no." "What can I help you with?" "My sister Jennifer is getting married in August, and she's asked me to be her maid of honor. The bachelorette party is the same weekend as a work retreat that Marcus can't miss, which means we'd need childcare for Emma for 3 days. That sounds like quite a scheduling challenge." "It is, and I know 3 days is a lot to ask. I looked into hiring a babysitter, but Emma would be more comfortable with family, and honestly I'd feel better knowing she was with you." I'd be happy to have Emma for the weekend. She can stay here and we'll have our own little adventure. Are you sure? I don't want to impose, especially for something as non-essential as a bachelorette party. Rebecca, it's your sister's wedding. Of course you should be there to celebrate with her. Thank you so much. I really can't tell you how much this means to me. It's my pleasure. Emma and I always have fun together. I know she does, and I'm grateful that she has such a wonderful grandmother. The weekend turned out to be delightful. Emma and I went to the zoo, made cookies, had movie nights, and generally enjoyed each other's company, without any of the stress that had once accompanied extended babysitting arrangements. When Rebecca and Marcus picked up Emma on Sunday evening, Rebecca seemed genuinely refreshed and happy from her weekend away. How did everything go? She asked. We had a wonderful time. Emma was an angel, as always. She looks happy and well rested. Thank you for taking such good care of her. It was truly my pleasure. I brought you something from the wedding, Rebecca said, handing me a small wrapped package. It's nothing big, just a little token of appreciation. Inside was a beautiful silk scarf in my favorite shade of blue, along with a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for being the grandmother Emma deserves, and for giving me the chance to be the daughter-in-law you deserve. With love and gratitude, Rebecca." I felt tears spring to my eyes as I read the note. It was the first time Rebecca had ever given me a gift that felt truly thoughtful and personal rather than obligatory. Rebecca, this is beautiful. Thank you. I saw it and thought of you. I know how much you love that shade of blue. The fact that she had noticed and remembered such a small detail about my preferences spoke volumes about how much attention she was now paying to our relationship. As autumn arrived, marking nearly a year since Miss Chen's recording had changed everything, I found myself reflecting on the journey our family had taken. The woman who had once been my source of stress and frustration had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Our conversations were real and substantive, our interactions were based on mutual respect, and our shared love for Emma had become a source of connection rather than conflict. Marcus had also grown during this process, becoming more assertive about family dynamics and more attentive to the way people in his life treated each other. He had learned to speak up when necessary and to value relationships based on respect rather than convenience. But perhaps most importantly, I had rediscovered my own worth and strength. The woman who had been called useless had proven to be anything but. I had successfully demanded respect, maintained my boundaries, and transformed a toxic relationship into something healthy and positive. The turning point had been my willingness to cut off completely, rather than continue accepting unacceptable treatment. By demonstrating that I valued myself enough to walk away, I had forced others to examine their own behavior and make genuine changes. On a crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after the recording that started everything, Rebecca called with news that surprised me. Margaret, I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from Marcus. I'm pregnant. Congratulations. How are you feeling? Excited and nervous. This pregnancy feels different from when I was expecting Emma. I feel more confident about being a mother, but also more aware of how much support I'll need. That's understandable. Second pregnancies often feel different. I was hoping I could ask you something. Of course. Would you be willing to help with Emma when the baby comes? I know it's a lot to ask, and I want you to feel free to say no if it's too much. I'd be honored to help. Emma and I love spending time together. Thank you. I can't imagine going through this without your support. You'll do wonderfully, Rebecca. You've grown so much as a mother and as a person. I've had a good example to follow. The sincerity in her voice told me that she was referring to more than just parenting skills. She was acknowledging the role I had played in helping her learn how to be part of a family that valued and respected each other. As I hung up the phone, I thought about Harold and how proud he would be of the way our family had healed and grown stronger. The journey hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when I wondered if the relationships could be salvaged. But by refusing to accept treatment that diminished my dignity, I had created space for something better to emerge. The woman who had once been called useless had found her true use, not as a servant or convenience, but as a valued member of a family built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve, and that real relationships can only exist when both people choose to show up with honesty and respect. Rebecca had learned that taking people for granted has consequences, and that maintaining relationships requires ongoing effort and consideration. Marcus had learned that keeping the peace sometimes requires disturbing at first, and that defending the people you love is more important than avoiding conflict. But perhaps most importantly, we had all learned that it's never too late to change destructive patterns and build something better in their place. The family that had nearly been torn apart by disrespect and resentment had been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty, accountability, and genuine care for each other's well-being. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at the photograph of Harold on my nightstand and whispered, "We did it, my love. We raised children who know how to grow and change and fight for what matters." The journey from that devastating recording to this moment of renewed family connection had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. By refusing to be useful to people who found me useless, I had discovered my true value and helped others discover theirs as well. The grandmother who had once been mocked behind closed doors was now cherished and respected, not because she had changed who she was, but because she had insisted that others change how they treated her, and in the end, that had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.